You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 126. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Do you find you sometimes struggle when it comes to your goals? Maybe you find that some goals come easily to you. You think of a goal, you create a plan, you follow through on your plan, and next thing you know, you have the result that you want, and it felt effortless and easy. Yet you may also have other areas of your life where you struggle. You set a goal, you do the same things it seems, you create a plan, and yet you fail to make that transition. You find it really hard to cross over the threshold between the planning and knowledge phase and the actual implementation of steps that would help you get closer to your goal. If you find that you have inconsistent results when it comes to goal setting, this podcast episode will absolutely help you. We are going to talk about how to set the right goals for you and how to approach your goals so that they become manageable and you can execute on them and create the results that you want instead of your goals leaving you feel overwhelmed and like you're constantly falling short. Before we dive into the substance of goal setting, I would invite you to think about the goals you have in your life right now and where you are in relation to them. Now, this is a podcast where primarily we talk about career, practice-related topics. And what I'd invite you to think about in today's podcast episode is to go beyond your professional work and to think about the goals you have for your life in general. I'm going to offer you 5 different categories, and you can think to yourself about the goals that you have for each of them. The first category is your health. This is an area where I think we can tend as busy professionals to put health on the back burner, promising ourselves that someday when the practice is up and running, someday when that trial has finally resolved, someday when I'm not so busy with the kids, I'll turn around and I'll focus on taking care of myself. And what I would invite you to think about is what health goals you have ahead of you that perhaps you haven't been giving your full attention to. Now, these could be a broad range of goals. It might be getting more exercise. It might be better nutrition. It might be getting more sleep. It might be integrating more rest into your life. It might be in some nature of self-care. And what I'd invite you to consider is that this is a priority for you. And if it's not already a priority, you might ask yourself how you can make it a priority because it really is the starting point for you achieving the rest of your goals. Now, I'm spending a little bit more time on this because I think it's really important. And one of the lessons that I learned very early on in my practice is that my physical health was absolutely essential to the execution of my job. I've mentioned on the podcast before that I used to litigate, and that would require that at times I would need to be in court in front of a judge or other decision maker. And what I learned was that some of the strategies that I had been using up until that point to succeed were no longer good success strategies. Now, what I mean by that is throughout my academic career, including law school, I was very much that procrastinating last minute kind of person. I had a really, really hard time with projects that didn't have deadlines, and I could do that. I could leave things to the last minute, and then I would play catch up by working really hard at the end and sometimes pulling all-nighters. Now, you can imagine that trying to show up in court after not having any sleep, while I understand that every once in a while that may happen, it is not the ideal way to do things. And so I learned as part of my practice litigating that I needed to go to bed by a certain time in order to be on point, in order to be prepared mentally, physically for the experience of going into court. So that required that I change some of the practices that I had to achieve success up until that point. Having children is another moment in my practice where I had to shift things. Whereas before having children, I had the luxury of spending as much time as I needed at the office to get things done. I now had to be more disciplined in terms of keeping to a work schedule because when the day was done, when my kids were out of daycare, when the nanny went home, I needed to be on. I needed to be available and taking care of my children. So you might think about how your life and how your practice have shifted over time. And you might think about how your attention to your health has changed, whether or not you continue to make it a priority. And if not, what goals might you have to bring your health into a priority, not only for the execution of your professional work, but also for the enjoyment of other aspects of your life. Another category where you might think about goals is your relationship goals. Now, these could be goals that you have with your partner. It might be goals that you have with family members. It might be goals that you have with your kids. It may be your friendships. It might be colleagues. So we don't always think about our relationships as things where we would want to set goals. But as you're thinking about how you want to set your life up, how you want to set your relationships up, you might think about what you would like those relationships to look like and who you want to be in those relationships. House goals, I put because, well, it's on my mind these days, is thinking about your living space, thinking about your workspace. And do you feel like things are organized the way that you like them? Have you removed the clutter that you don't want to be there? Are you bringing in things that you truly love? Marie Kondo comes to mind. Do you have things that spark joy in your physical spaces? Are you where you want to be living? How is that situation working for you? So you may have goals in terms of where you're actually living. Now, if you're a parent like me, you might have specific parenting goals. You might want to be more organized when it comes to your family schedule. You might want to be spending more time with your family and more time where you're truly present. I know this can come up, especially when your work becomes very taxing, very demanding. If you're going through a stressful period at the office, it might be really hard to disconnect from your professional work and engage fully with your family. And so maybe you have goals there in terms of the time that you want to spend with them. You may find that you have challenges when it comes to parenting, whether that's becoming resentful of some of the workload that comes along with that, whether you're engaging with your children in the way that you want to. Are you patient with them? Do you find sometimes you're losing your cool or not showing up as a parent that you want? So you might have some goals there too. And then finally, your professional or your business goals. So here you may have very specific goals about what you want to accomplish this year, and we're getting close to 2024 as well. You might have goals that you're setting for next year. So what does that look like? It could be meeting your billable targets. It might be income goals that you're setting for yourself. You may be looking for promotion, whether it's partnership at your law firm, whether it's promotion in your organization. You might be looking to change jobs. You may even be looking to change careers. You may also be thinking about your team. Who are you building as a support for you in your practice? You might also think about the substantive work that you're doing. Is there a new area that you want to be moving into? Is there a certain type of work that you want to get more of? And finally, how do you feel in terms of overall career satisfaction? When you look at your professional work, when you look at it week to week, month to month, do you have a general sense of being satisfied with the work that you're doing, or do you want something more? So when it comes to goal setting, and we've gone through a number of different categories where you may have very specific goals. And if you do have those goals, you might pause the recording and write them down as a reminder to yourself. But what I find the problem is that there's no shortage in terms of knowing what it is that you need to do to achieve your goals. The problem is more in taking the actions that will create the outcomes you want. So what that means is that you may have a goal in mind, and you may even know exactly the steps that are required in order to obtain it. One example that comes to mind for me is this idea of fitness or health, right? We can all Google what a healthy meal plan looks like. We can all Google what a good workout schedule might be. And even with that knowledge, you may still find that it's difficult to take action steps toward the actual implementation. And so there are a number of reasons why this may happen. Even though you have that goal in mind, you're not approaching it in a way that supports the attainment of it. So one reason is that you don't set goals at all. Now, this is something that I've seen happen with clients that I work with. It happened in a recent conversation that I had with a client where the issue was that they hadn't set a goal at all. They hadn't decided on a particular path. They were kind of reacting to the environment that they were in, going with the flow, not really having a clear direction. But then they felt a little bit disappointed, actually a lot disappointed, when they didn't end up in the position that they'd hoped that they would end up in. And the reason wasn't so much that this person didn't have the capacity to do it, it's that they simply had not set a goal for themselves. It's like you may not want to admit to yourself that you want to reach a certain goal. Or it may also be that you're in an environment where you don't want a particular goal, but you're on a path toward that goal, and you don't want to admit yourself that you don't want to be there. So not setting the goal is the first problem when it comes to goal setting, not admitting to yourself of what it is, not setting that goal, not wanting to be disappointed by it. Now, another example is when you have a goal in mind, right? You might say, I want to be a leader at this organization. I maybe become partner. Is an okay example. It's fairly specific, but maybe you set that goal, but without making it specific in terms of the things that you need to do to get there. Or you might say something like, I want to be a leader in my industry. And so you have a goal, but the goal is articulated in such a way that it is too vague. And so it's not one that is immediately actionable. You don't know where to start. You might set an elusive goal. So sometimes you'll set a goal that is so far out of reach, it's so far out of the realm of anything close to what you're doing right now that you have it as a goal, but it seems so unrealistic that you don't even begin to try to achieve it. Now, you might also have the opposite problem where you set goals that are not very compelling. They are not very challenging. And so you find that, yes, you're checking off your goals, but they don't bring up a lot of excitement for you. One thing that I put in that category, for example, is some of the base level things you might need to do to maintain your practice license. This came up for me this year. I needed to renew my coaching certification. And so, yes, it's a goal. And actually, it's a goal that I'm proud of. I did do what I wanted to do. And in fact, I did more than I had planned to do. I wanted to renew my coaching credential and I went up a level to professional certified coach, which is a great achievement. I'm very proud. And yet that goal, because it's part of the process, isn't necessarily one that causes a huge amount of stretch. It's not one that necessarily causes you to want to reach further. In the lawyering example, for example, it might be that you need to get a certain number of CPD credits in order to maintain your license. And so it's a goal. It's something that you're going to do, you'll follow through on, but it's not necessarily something that's going to advance you professionally. Now, you might also find that you set a goal, but then you don't put any time into your goal. And this is totally natural. It's normal, especially when you have a busy practice. You're so busy that carving out extra time to actually execute on a particular goal just doesn't happen. And you don't make the time, even though you're telling yourself that it's important. And then finally, what I see challenging when it comes to setting goals is that sometimes the goal that you have is actually more of a cyclical goal. So it might be practice management goals. It might be target hour type of goals. It might be promotion type of goals. And the goal itself is, you might think about it in such a way as you reach that level and then you're done. And yet it's unrealistic because there's an ongoing practice that is required to sustain it. So I think here of that yo-yo diet culture where you decide that you want to be, super fit. And so you enter into a regimen that's unrealistic. It's unsustainable. You know, you can keep it up for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, but then you crash and burn and it's not something that you want to keep doing. And you can do the same thing professionally. You can set yourself up for sprints or periods of time where you're working really, really hard toward a goal. And sometimes that makes sense. Maybe it's just the nature of your practice. You've got a transactional practice. You've got a hearing coming up and it requires that level of exertion. And then there's a downtime after that. So that might be part of the cycle that you're gearing toward. But if you're setting yourself up for a long-term goal, and in order to get that goal, you have to exert yourself at a level that is beyond sustainable, then you might reach the goal, but you're not going to be able to sustain it. And that's where you see sometimes lawyers enter into that burnout cycle, or they end up in that all or nothing thinking pattern where you're either doing nothing at all or you're doing way too much. And it's almost like you're swinging back and forth like a pendulum. So these are a number of reasons why you might be setting goals or not setting goals, and why the goals that you set don't ultimately come to fruition. There's one more that I wanted to mention, and that is sometimes you set a goal or you don't want to set a goal because you're concerned about how you're going to respond to that goal. It might be that you get so hyper-focused and fixated on the goal that you let other elements of your practice and your personal life fall to the wayside, and you don't want that to happen. So that can be another reason why you might struggle with goal setting. Now, if you struggle with goal setting, if you find that there's an inconsistency in your level of achieving your goals, That's fine. It's totally normal. You're human. You're busy. You've got lots of different pots on the oven, and you're focused on the day-to-day, the most immediate needs that require your attention. Chances are nobody has taught you how to set goals. I think you may have learned, whether in a book or through society or a teacher or a mentor or a professor or whoever, you may have learned that you set a goal, you do whatever it takes to get there. You may have a no pain, no gain mentality. You may have heard that work hard, play hard. You're led to believe that if you work really hard and you get the goals that you've set for yourself, that things will be different for you over there. The grass will be greener. But then you get there and you realize you're still the same person. You still have challenges. And once you achieve that next goal, there's another goal ahead of you. It's kind of like if you're climbing a mountain and you get to the top of one mountain, then you all of a sudden can see that there are many more mountains ahead of you. And so it's almost like a treadmill effect where you never get the chance of feeling satisfied because there's always something else to go toward. You may also find that it's difficult because nobody's looking over your shoulder to check up on you. Whereas in law school, or if you're in an organization where there's a tight monitoring of your day-to-day activities and your career progression, if you're in more of a freestyle state, maybe you have your own practice, maybe you're in a firm where there's a bit more flexibility, then you might be in a situation where you are accountable to you and others aren't really paying attention to you and your goals. And what you might find then is that things look pretty good from the outside. You appear to be doing well. You've checked all the boxes. And yet inside, you're feeling that sense of dissatisfaction. You're feeling increasingly unhappy. You feel like, why is it that you've worked so hard and yet you don't really enjoy where you are? And you're the only person that is accountable to you for your goal. And what you might find is that you haven't built the relationship with yourself to the point where you are able to follow through on the promises that you make to yourself. Now, you also may find that you are afraid to set goals because you've let yourself down so many times, or like I mentioned earlier, you get so hyper-focused when you set a goal that everything else falls away. And I've worked with clients who are really averse to the idea of setting a goal for those reasons. And if that's something that you can relate to, you're absolutely not alone. Finally, goals can be challenging to reach because they may make you feel overwhelmed. In this day and age, we have so much access to information. We have the internet. We have individuals out there who are willing to offer their guidance, their opinions, and you may find well-meaning colleagues, well-meaning friends and family who are offering you suggestions and advice in terms of how to reach your goals. You may find that you have so many choices that you don't want to pick the wrong strategy. And so you might find either you don't make a decision at all, or you dabble a little bit in one direction and then you find that's not working fast enough. So you try another direction and you're jumping from strategy to strategy without getting any traction. And then ultimately you give up. So what can happen there is that you tell yourself, status quo is not so bad. I will just let this goal sit on the back burner until I'm ready for it. But then you never truly feel ready. You might find that you set goals and then you ignore them. You're just not able to get to them. You don't have the time. Then you start to feel disappointed. And then you realize another year has gone by. This is why those New Year's resolutions goals are so interesting when you see what happens year to year, what you keep coming back to. And so you go to set it again. Then you might find that you set goals, you get that initial traction, but then things start getting really tough. Something comes up in your professional or your personal responsibilities that throw you off track, and then you never really get back on board. Now, the reason this approach to goal setting isn't really working is that it's reactive. You're reacting to the outside. You are taking potentially an all or nothing approach where you're either 100% all in and you're fast and furious working toward your goal, or you're just not doing anything at all. And what you might find then is that the pace itself becomes exhausting and unsustainable. And if you are not reaching a goal, if you're setting goals for yourself and you are not reaching those goals, chances are there's a reason for it. And chances are there's a common thread among them. And you may have heard the expression, the way that you do one thing is how you do everything. So if you find that there's a goal that you've set as a health goal, and you've also got a relationship goal, and you've also got a career satisfaction goal, and you find you're not really making traction on any of those particular goals, number one, it may be that your focus is too far spread out. But it could also be that there's a particular obstacle that keeps coming back. And the challenge here for you is to figure out what that obstacle is and learn how to overcome it. And some of the obstacles that I see among clients that I work with are, number one, being honest with yourself about what you want. I think sometimes we are conditioned to think that there are certain goals that are good goals. There are goals that we should follow. There are achievements and accolades that we want to admit that we want. We want to want them. And yet sometimes we don't actually want those goals. You might think you want partnership at your firm, but when you actually get there, you realize that it's not actually what you want. It's something that you thought you wanted because that's what everyone told you that you should want. And then you get there and you realize, wait a minute, this is not the answer. You might find that there's something else that you want that you're almost embarrassed to admit that you want. And so you tuck it away in the recesses of your mind. You never really go after it. So there's lots of reasons why you might not get your goal. One of them being that you are just not honest with yourself about what you want that goal to be. It may be that you have unrealistic expectations about the goal and what it takes to get there. So for example, going back to this idea that there are goals that are sustainable. It's kind of like when you brush your teeth, but you're going to keep brushing your teeth 2 or 3 times a day, every day. It's not something that you can kind of do one time and then hang up the shingle. This is more of a ongoing process. And so being honest with yourself about what the expectations are, right? If you go back to the example, say or if I give the example of running a marathon, you might train for a marathon and be able to run that marathon because you've done the work. But if you stop training, if you stop doing that work toward the goal, and a year later you go back to the marathon running and you haven't practiced in the interim, it's going to be so much more difficult for you to do that. And so looking at your goals with a more sustainable approach in terms of what is required for the upkeep, this is especially true of time management. How do you keep that practice ongoing so that you can continue to maintain the level of success that you have obtained? Another challenge might be understanding what's truly important to you so that you can do the uncomfortable things that come up, along with prioritizing your goal. So if you pick a goal that is really meaningful to you, then it will be worth it to you, because when you choose A, you're going to have to give up B. If you decide that the goal that you want is to create more balance in your life, i.e., you want to do less professional work, spend less time at work and more time with your family, there are trade-offs that are going to come with that. And so you'll want to get clear ahead of time about what those trade-offs might be. If you decide, for example, that what you want is to do the opposite, maybe you want to ramp up your practice and you know that more time spent in the marketing phase, in the work phase, and that's going to cost you in terms of time that you spend leisure time or family time, that is a trade-off that you might need to make. You might decide that you want to build a team and that you want your team to grow. That might mean that you have less control over the work that you're producing because you're requesting that others do that work for you. You're delegating more. It might mean that there's a difference in the relationship that you have with your team, that you're having to impose certain expectations and standards on them. You might have to step into a role where you're giving more feedback. Sometimes it's going to be constructive feedback. And so there's going to be trade-offs with every decision that you make, with every goal that you set. And so getting really clear about the goals and deciding which ones truly matter to you lies at the heart of your goals ultimately being ones that you are successful in achieving. Now, when goal setting is not done in an intentional way, what you might find is you have that undefined relationship with your goals. That's when you have that unpredictable and inconsistent success. You don't really know why sometimes it's working and sometimes it's not. And what you might feel is like you're chasing a moving target. So you set the goal, you maybe reach it, but then you feel like you're always behind, you're always catching up. You may also feel like there's a gap between where you are right now and where it is that you want to be. And instead of that gap getting smaller, you find that it's staying the same or maybe even getting wider. And in some cases, you do what it takes to reach your goal, but the process was so grueling that you can't enjoy the goal or sustain it. So what can happen is you reach your goal and then you immediately stop trying and you revert back to where you started. It's that yo-yo approach. It's like the example with the marathon. You do what it takes to run that marathon, but then you go back to that non-training phase, and it's almost like that all or nothing approach. So instead, what I'd like to offer today, when it comes to goal setting, I'm going to offer you a few suggestions to help you figure out how to set goals that you'll be able to attach yourself to, that you'll be able to get behind, that you'll be able to get yourself motivated, that will have meaning for you, and that will help you move forward toward creating the things that you want. Now, there's 4 suggestions altogether. The first of those suggestions is to set your goals strategically. And here I would invite you to think about SMART goals and stretch goals. Now, SMART goals are a type of goal. You may have heard of them already, and it's a way of describing a goal. It's an acronym that gives you certain categories for how that goal is set up. Now, the categories are: S is for specific. You want to set a goal that is specific. M is for measurable. You want to be able to measure the goal. So if the goal is, I want to meet my target, then the measurable component of that might be it's 1,700 hours a year, it's 1,800 hours a year, whatever your target happens to be. That is the measurable component of your goal. The A stands for achievable. So here, when you're looking at a SMART goal, you want to set something that is achievable. Now, bear this in mind because a stretch goal might not necessarily be achievable. And so I want you to just focus on that for the moment. And so you're going to want to make that goal achievable. So is your target achievable? How do you make it achievable? That's going to play into your strategizing when it comes to the goal. The R. Now, I've seen different modes of this being presented. Sometimes the R stands for realistic. So that echoes that notion of achievable. So you want your goal to be realistic. And sometimes the R stands for relevant. Now, personally, I prefer the relevant description because that to me ties your goal into something that matters to you. How is this goal relevant to you and what you're trying to create? Realistic, I think that's fine too. Again, it's kind of echoing that notion of achievable. What is a realistic way of achieving this particular goal that you're setting yourself up for? And then T is for time bound. So when is the goal going to have happened by? What is your due date? That's a great way to put some pressure on yourself to make that goal actually happen. You might also think about time bound in terms of how much time does it take for you to create this goal. So the SMART model is very effective for creating a plan to achieve something in the sense that you are required to sit down, you're required to take your goal, you're required to break it down into categories, and it will give you a fairly granular and realistic way to think about going about achieving your goal. Now, the stretch goal is different in its approach. A stretch goal is when you set a goal that is going to require that you do something completely different. It might push you completely outside of your comfort zone. Now, depending on how far you want to stretch your goal, you could create a goal that seems impossible. And the purpose of setting a goal that seems impossible is that it's going to require you to adopt a whole new way of thinking about your goal. It's going to require you to create new strategies, and it's not just improving on existing practices. It may require that you're doing a complete reinvention, a complete redesign. So when you think about setting a stretch goal for yourself, I would invite you to think about what goals feel really compelling to you, where you set the goal and you think to yourself, I have no idea how I'm going to do this, but I know I really want to do it and I'm going to figure it out. And what's really interesting about a stretch goal is that a stretch goal requires you to become a different person, right? The thinking that got you here is not the thinking that will get you there. So when you're setting goals, what I would invite you to consider is that there are SMART goals. These are the almost predictable or conservative goals that you can set for yourself. And there are the stretch goals. And the stretch goals are the ones that are going to propel you forward. They're going to require a different way of thinking. And in a perfect world, you come up with stretch goals that resonate deeply with you. You can go back to those categories for the SMART goal and think about, okay, how specific do I want to make it? When do I want to have this goal done by? How is this goal relevant to what I'm trying to do with my career, with my personal life, whatever it is? But again, you want to set that stretch goal, and then you can use that stretch goal as the model. That is the goal. That is the ambition. That's going to generate the creativity. And then you can action your way to the achievement of that goal by creating smaller SMART goals. And you can space those out. Some people like 30-day increments. Some people like 90-day increments. But you can break down that big stretch goal by using SMART goals. So I've got a method of goal setting that I use. It's called the Great Goal Model. I believe it goes back to episode 6 of the podcast. You're welcome to go back and listen to it. It's a little bit of a hybrid. It has elements of the SMART goal in it. It is an acronym. In my version of it, goal, it's great with an exclamation point. G stands for create a goal. What is that goal? And you want that goal to be specific and measurable. You want to be able to know if you've achieved it or not. The R in the Great Goal Model stands for the reason. What is the why behind what it is that you're trying to do? So you want to set a goal where there's a compelling reason for this goal. It's not just because someone told me to, or because I think it's a good idea, or it's what I should do next. You want there to be a compelling reason why you've chosen this goal. The E is for energy. What kind of energy do you want to bring to that goal? Maybe it's commitment, maybe it's confidence, maybe it's resolve. But what kind of energy are you bringing to that goal? A is for action. What are the action steps that will be required for you to reach your goal? So you might set that up as a series of actionable and attainable goals, like the SMART goals. T is for time bound. So when is it going to happen by, and how much time do you need to commit to do it? And in the Great Goal Model, the exclamation point is that Delta card. It's a wild card. It's to ask yourself, what is not covered here that is important to me about this particular goal? So that's step number 1 is I invite you to take a goal and to run it through different models, to think about it in terms of a SMART goal, in terms of a stretch goal, in terms of a great goal, whatever model resonates with you, and to set yourself up so that your goals are compelling, they're interesting, they're going to move you forward. And you've also given yourself the scaffolding that you need in order to make progress toward your goal. You've broken it down. You've broken the steps down into pieces that are bite-sized enough that you will actually take steps toward it. Now, step 2 is to focus as much on the who as the how. So when you set a goal, for example, we talked about how everybody knows what it takes to have a fitness goal, right? You can Google that, no problem. You'll have a meal plan and an exercise plan just at your fingertips. And the question is, how are you going to actually follow that plan? And if you think about your professional goals, chances are you can break them down as well. You could figure out what are the ingredients that are required for me to get the promotion? What steps do I need to follow to have a different job? What do I need to set up in my practice to better manage my time? Chances are you can Google any of these questions and somebody out there will have a list of things for you to do. And the question then becomes not the execution or the know-how, I should say, but who is the person who actually implements on these things? There's a real difference between the person who looks up how to run a marathon and makes a nice, pretty schedule and then never does a training in their life versus the person who prints up a schedule, doesn't have to be perfect, and then puts their runners on every morning and spends some time pounding the pavement. So for you, what does that look like? What activity might you be researching that you haven't yet actually physically got your runners on and started pounding the pavement toward? So one way to think about this is there's the how. So what are the steps required? And then there's the who. Who do you need to be in order to have that goal? And one of the models that I've offered before on the podcast is one that I learned in my coach training, and it's the be, do, have model. And it's different from the way that we usually think about things. We often think about the goal as something that we want to have, right? We want to have the result. We want to have the new job, or we want to be a partner, or we want that perfectly scheduled time. That is the thing. And so we think that we need to do the things in order to have the results. And then we get to be the person who has those results. And the be do have model asks you to put that in reverse. So the first question is, who do you need to be, or who do you need to become in order to have that result? And from that place, you take actions that align with that person. And then in turn, you will then generate or create the result that you're looking for. And so this is a much deeper way of going about goal setting, instead of looking at the action steps and kind of following that plan without ever really changing your self-concept, without really changing who you need to be in order to have that result. This way of approaching a goal requires you to think about, who is that person? Who is the person that made partner? Who is the person that ran the marathon? What are they doing differently from what you are doing currently? And can you step into the shoes of that person and think like that person and take the same actions or similar actions as that person in order to create that result? So that's step 2, is to focus as much on the who as the how. Now, the third tool when it comes to goal setting is to set your goals from the future instead of setting your goals with a vision of the past. And you might find whether it's a goal that you're setting as a health goal, maybe you're looking back to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, where you were super fit and you were in all these sports clubs and, that felt really good to you. Maybe it's a relationship goal. Maybe you think back to before you had kids and you had all these friends and you had all these parties and you went traveling all the time. You might look at work goals where you were enjoying a certain level of success in your organization, where you were climbing up the learning curve. There might have been times where maybe you had a different composition in terms of the practice groups you're in or the organization that you're in. So you're looking to a point in the past and you're almost looking at that as the ideal and wishing that you could go back in time, wishing that you could recreate something like that. And what I would invite you to think about instead is to flip the perspective of your goal setting so that you're now setting your goal based on the future and what you're trying to create there. And the future goal will look different because your circumstances now will have changed and your circumstances will continue to change as you move forward. So when you look at your goal from that vantage point of the future, what is different about that? Where are you moving toward? What is it that you want to experience that is going to be different? If you use the health goal, for example, if you're no longer on a million sports teams, you don't have time for that. Maybe you're older and the level of fitness that you had achieved previously isn't quite aligned with that. Not to say it is, because there's plenty of fit people who are well into their more senior years. But what does that look like? What does that look like for you going forward relative to what it was as a thing of the past? Now, finally, the fourth category when it comes to goal setting is to be realistic about the trade-offs and to be realistic at the outset. And again, as I mentioned, time is often an issue. Time is a very big problem for a lot of the lawyers that I work with. They have goals like changing jobs. They have goals to manage their time better. They have goals to delegate more. They have goals to network more, to promote themselves. There are a number of goals that you may have, and the biggest problem that you have is time. I can tell you that my experience with some of the goals that I have, the biggest challenge that I have isn't the mindset work. It's not that I don't want to do it. It is literally carving the time in my calendar so that I can execute on the goal. I can actually spend the time. So you might need to factor in whatever goal it is that you're setting, that one of the biggest challenges that you might face is giving it a priority, advancing it on your priority list so that you actually spend time on it. And what that means is that there are going to be trade-offs. You're going to have to give something up in order to make time for that project. Now, you could take sleep off the table, but I don't think that's the way to go. Going back to the idea of putting your health first and creating a sustainable approach, right? You want your success to be sustainable enough. So what is the time commitment that is going to be involved? What are you going to have to give up in exchange for your goal? If, for example, your goal is to delegate more, to build a team and delegate more, what are you going to have to give up? You might have a really great relationship right now with some of the people that you want to delegate to, and you're going to be required to ask them to do work that you do not want to do yourself, work that might eat into their evenings and weekends, and you might feel really challenged doing that. And that is the trade-off that you're going to need to make in order to create the result that you want. You might find, for example, that calendaring, having a better time management practice is something that you want, and yet you do not want to be a person who has to follow a calendar. You may not want to spend time in the morning sitting at your desk, looking at your day and figuring out how to allocate time in a way that is the most practical. That might not appeal to you, and yet that is the trade-off that you may need to make in order to achieve your goal. So I invite you to think about the trade-offs that you may need to make in order to achieve your goal, because when you make that decision consciously ahead of time that you are going to need to make those trade-offs, then in the moment, it may be easier for you to then follow through on what it is that you told yourself you wanted to do. So just to recap, the suggestions that I have for you when it comes to setting goals that you'll be able to stick to, where you'll be able to create success more predictably, is number one, set your goals strategically. So you want to have a balance of stretch goals and smart goals. You want your goals to be stretchy enough, to be interesting enough, to be compelling enough, to require a different way of thinking enough that you are engaged by them, you're intrigued by them, and you stay engaged. And at the same time, you want to have a sufficient level of smart goal, structure to them so that it's not overwhelming. You've got a step-by-step approach that you can take. You've got digestible compartments of goals that you can hack away at one at a time that will lead you to the attainment of that larger goal. Number 2, you want to focus as much on who you need to be, who you need to become in order to achieve your goal, as much as you're focusing on the how, on the steps that are required. Number 3, you want to set your goals based on how you want things to look in the future, instead of focusing your goals on some version of what things used to be like in the past. And then finally, you want to be honest with yourself about the trade-offs. You want to go into this eyes wide open, knowing that in order to achieve the success that you want in area A means that you may need to make some trade-offs in area B. Now, when you approach your goals using these strategies, what will happen is, number 1, by setting your goal, you will then be able to channel your focus and attention on what it is that matters to you, and you'll be able to release those things that do not get your attention anymore. It will help you to reduce distractions. It will give you more energy to work toward your goals. You'll have an internal sense of a GPS that is leading you in the direction of where you want to go. You will learn the meta skill of how to set and achieve your goals. The more you do this, the more you practice it, the more accountability you'll develop with yourself. You'll learn how to do it better. And what you'll find is that you get hooked on the feeling that comes from that satisfaction that comes from setting a goal, following a process, and achieving your goals. And what you'll do is that you'll prove to yourself that you have more control than you give yourself credit for setting and achieving the goals that you want. And you'll learn how pulling on different levers is going to create different outcomes for you. So you'll see where your actions create the greatest outcomes and what you can stop doing. The skills that are required are, number 1, a willingness to try. I can tell when I speak with lawyers, when I speak with clients, some of them are willing to do the work that is required in order to make a change. And I can usually tell fairly early on in our conversation whether or not somebody is willing to make a change, whether or not they're willing to commit to a process. And that makes all of the difference. Your willingness, your commitment to yourself that you're actually going to go and do what it takes to achieve a particular goal. This doesn't mean that you have to be hard on yourself. It doesn't mean that you have to make the process painful or difficult, but you do need to make that commitment, that decision that you're going to go ahead with it. It requires a willingness to take a chance on doing things differently. You might have to give up some of the strategies that you've used before that helped you get to a certain level of success, just like I had to give up my all-nighters, in order to exchange those strategies for ones that will help you get to that level of success that you're working toward. Now, you'll need to be willing to invest in your goals. If the goals are really important to you, you're going to need to plan for them. You're going to sit down. You're going to have to come up with an idea of how you're going to make this work. You're going to have some ideas about how you're going to make this work, set timelines for yourself. You might need to get the help of other people. You might need to get support for your goals. And I strongly encourage you to get support for your goals. This could be friends who support you. This could be hiring a team that is going to support you. It could include hiring a coach who is going to support you, somebody who's going to help you stay accountable to your goal, make it a priority, and take the steps that you need to take in order to reach your goal. And of course, it requires an investment of your time. You need to be willing to invest your time on that goal because your time is required. I mean, unless you can farm out 99% of the work to other people who can bring that goal to life for you, then you're going to need to invest some amount of time in making this goal happen. You'll also need to develop a practice of setting goals and achieving them. You're going to need to be patient because there are going to be challenges along the way. You're going to feel like your goals are not moving forward fast enough. And you're going to want to develop a practice of self-reflection so that you can see in yourself the changes that are taking place as you move towards your goal. Again, going back to the idea that the goal in itself is part of the fun, right? The goal, achieving that goal is part of the reward, but a bigger part of the reward often is who you become in the process of attaining that goal. When you think about how much more creative you need to become, how much more resilient you need to become, how your confidence develops as a result of achieving your goal, that is the real gift that comes from achieving your goals. what you'll find is that when you apply these strategies, when you develop that practice of setting and achieving your goals, you'll see the gap shrink between where you are and where you want to be. You'll be able to track your progress. And what you'll notice is that goals that previously seemed unattainable now are happening as a matter of course. It has become your norm. And you'll typically feel more confident because you have more control. You know that you can set the goal and achieve it. Now, if you are in a position where you are looking at goals, whether these are goals at work or goals that are in your professional life, maybe you're looking for more balance, better time management, maybe you are looking to make a transition career-wise, maybe you're looking for promotion, maybe you've stepped into leadership, you might be in a situation right now where you want to be setting a goal and you don't quite know how to approach it. You can use what you've learned in today's podcast, of course, to help you with that. You can go back to episode number 6. There's lots of suggestions there in terms of how to create a goal and execute on it so that you reach the goal. And if you would like additional support, I would, of course, love to help you. It's one of the things I love doing most in the work that I do is helping lawyers figure out what their goals are and helping them take the steps necessary to achieve them. So by all means, please do feel free to reach out to me to set up a consult. If you are a woman lawyer and you're interested in doing this in a group context, I will be running another group coaching and mastermind program 6 months starting in January 2024. It is such a fabulous experience. I'm working with my second group at the moment. We had our call earlier today. We talked about confidence, authority, and power and had such a fabulous discussion about how that plays into the decisions that you make, the actions that you take and do not take. In the program, we set a goal. Each participant sets a goal, and then we spend the next 6 months working toward that goal, going through a number of different topics, dealing with the obstacles that come up, the self-concept work that is required. So if that appeals to you, then by all means, I invite you to reach out and to join me for that next year. So with that, I am going to sign off. I'm going to thank you for joining me here today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you about goals and goal setting. Like I said, if you have any desire to get some support on something that you're working toward, I'd love to have a chat with you about it. And yeah, until next week, I wish you a fabulous week. I hope you achieve all the goals that you set for yourself. And if you have any questions, of course, feel free to reach out. Thanks again, and bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.